this important panel about how we close the opportunity gap for working adult learners. There are about 88 million working adults who could benefit from education skilling. And at Guild, our entire mission is about unlocking opportunity for working adults through education, upskilling, career mobility. And we do that by partnering with great employers and great institutions and learning partners. And I'm really honored to have 3 of those learning partners here today. I wanted to have each one of them quickly introduce themselves, talk a little bit about why solving this gap and really creating opportunities for working adults is important to them. Craig, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, good afternoon. Craig Wilson, Vice Provost for Online, Distance, and Continuing Education at the University of Arizona. And I think what compels me to be a part of today's discussion really is understanding that there's so much, we heard about the Great Resignation and the Great Reshuffle. I think it's really helpful for employees to have pathways and things of that nature so that they could stay with the organization that they're with. And if that doesn't work out, to provide pathways and what have you at other organizations. So it's important.
Jelena.
Good afternoon. My name is Jelena Alston. I'm an associate professor at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. I specifically teach adult education courses in the Master of Science in Adult Education program. And for me, this is all that I've known and all that I've lived with for the past almost 20 years. I've been fortunate to have engaged in multiple conversations and conduct research in adult education, and now working at North Carolina A&T. I'm glad to be on a team that is really striving and making way for some very important initiatives to support our working learners at North Carolina A&T so that they can go out, be global citizens, and engage. And I'm just excited about the attention. I've been screaming for a long time, hey, we need to focus on these adult learners because they've been here for some time. And so I'm really excited and just pleased to be here on this panel.
Great. And Tom?
I'm Tom Cavanagh. I am Vice Provost for Digital Learning and Continuing Education at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. And we are a large public university in a growing metropolitan area. And it's part of our responsibility to educate all students, not just those coming out of high school with a diploma and a GPA, but those who might be working, those who might be transferring, those who might be coming back to school with a collection of credits. It's part of our mission to serve those students, and within the institution, I feel kind of a personal responsibility, given my role, to speak for those students as we're doing planning.
Great, Tom. So I think as we talk about working adult learners, we at Guild, we talk about the new traditional student. And I think we can all agree that higher ed has been built to serve the traditional student, oftentimes in a residential experience, in a typical kind of age range. One data point that I find really amazing is that right now, almost 30% of undergraduate students are parents. So about 5 million undergraduate students are parents. So they're juggling parenting. Many of those are working adults, as well as their studies simultaneously. So I think it'd be a great place to start and talk about, from each institution's perspective, what did these students look like demographically? What unique experiences do they bring into the classroom? And Craig, do you want to?
It's interesting, whenever I hear that data point, it always takes me to the other data point about 36 million or so folks who started college and didn't finish. And within the state of Arizona, we're looking at about 1 million who started and didn't finish. And, they look like you and me. These are adults, typically ages 28 to about 45 for the largest cross-section. And they're working, they have families, and they're juggling all of those things and still trying to pursue their degree. So interestingly enough, it's predominantly female, which we're glad to see. that so many women are going back to complete their degrees. But I also think that you know, we're going to see that trend where the traditional student will likely be challenged number-wise by the non-traditional student.
Yeah. Jelena, so NCA&T is #1 public HBCU. There was a great HBCU panel earlier today for those who saw it. What do you see? How do you view these new traditional students?
So for HBCUs, I don't see them as new, right? HBCUs have a history of supporting adult learners dating back to the 1960s and 1970s. And so they're not new to us, right? But the one thing I can say is that another data point that was most alarming was a few years ago, the opportunities, America's Opportunities Gap by the numbers. It illuminated that 50% of Black Americans do not have an education beyond a high school diploma, right? And so on one hand, you think, oh, well, K-12. But for me, I instantly thought, wow, 50% of people who look like me have the potential to be adult learners in higher ed right now. And so for me, that moved me. And it really prompted me to continue to engage in conversations with our administration, with corporations such as Guild, Strata Education Network, to say, hey, what can we do to work and move this forward? And we really do need to unpack and understand this particular population. Another thing, 36 may be parents, but then a lot of them are also caregivers, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's the sandwich generation that we have where you're taking care of your kids and you're taking care of your elderly or your loved ones. It's just the complexity of it all. I'm encouraged, I'm intrigued, and I'm also excited about the future of working learners.
That's great. And Tom, what do you see at UCF?
I'm going to underscore Jelena's word complexity. When we look at adult learners, they seem to kind of fall into two broad areas, but everybody's got their own unique story. You have those who've never gone to college and are coming back to college for the first time. And of course, there are all kinds of rules and regulations in the state of Florida about SAT scores and GPAs and other kinds of things in a public university like ours, which are barriers. And then you have those students, you know, to Craig's point, who may have started and then dropped out or stopped out and are showing up with a collection of credits, maybe from multiple institutions, sorting through all of that. Sometimes they've used up their financial aid, or they've got holds because of an unpaid parking ticket somewhere or whatever, and you've got to untangle these big knots in order to try to serve these students. They're just complex, and I don't think we can treat them as a block in some ways. You have to treat them individually.
Yeah, that is a great segue. I like the way you describe that as knots that have to be untied or figured out. What are some of the big barriers that working adult students, learners face when they are trying to access and then ultimately thrive in the education system? Maybe Jelena, do you want to start with that?
One that always comes to mind is the hours of operation for our support services with students. I do not understand in 2022 why we still have financial aid offices, the IT support, financial aid, the treasurer or the accounting only open from 8 to 5. When if your adult learners are working from 8 to 5, right? Or they're picking up their children from school at certain times. So why haven't we seen a shift in our hours of operations, right? Also, another thing that I think is sometimes a barrier is the extracurricular opportunities to engage.
Yeah.
We know that theories of student development, when there are certain activities that adult learners and all learners, if they engage in outside of the classroom, how it supports their matriculation and persistence in the classroom and makes them holistically more well-rounded. Well, when do you have the opportunities for adult learners if they're working during the day and taking classes at night or online? What other opportunities or spaces are we creating for those adult learners so that they also can get engaged with support through those various activities, clubs, organizations, et cetera? So I think those are just the two that automatically come to mind: hours of operations and student activity engagement.
Support, community,
Yes,
really important
yes.
things. How do you create that for working adults who don't have a lot of time by definition? Tom, what would you add? You had mentioned a couple of things like requirements around SATs, other sort of traditional student kind of credentials that typically universities are looking for. What are some of the things that don't apply for working adult learners?
Yeah, maybe I'll touch on some policy things.
Yeah.
So a couple that come to mind. We're fortunate in the state of Florida within the public system that we have common course numbering. So if you start at a state college or a community college and you transfer to a university, those credits automatically transfer because it's the same course number, it covers the same learning objectives. But if you went to a private school or you're coming from out of state, who knows if it's going to apply? And I know that within other state systems, even sometimes within the same university system, the credits don't always apply. And that's a big barrier if you're trying to have, mobility, if you have to stop out and then maybe pick up somewhere else if you change your major or something. And then maybe the other policy issue, and this, I'll say it, we'll see if I get in trouble, but I think that the state policymakers look at everything through a traditional four-year lens. And in many cases, it's because that's what they experienced, right? At the state flagship.
Yeah.
They went in, they joined a fraternity, and there's nothing wrong with that. But our students are part-time, and to provide performance funding, for example, like we get based on a four-year graduation rate, is completely antithetical to supporting adult learners who need to take one class at a time or two classes at a time because they're working full-time. And I think that needs to be addressed.
Great. Any Florida legislators here? Or
Holla.
Tom's good. Tom's good. Craig, what do you think? Actually, before we go to you, one thing we'll come back to that you alluded to, Tom, is the way we think about outcomes. And again, it's usually in a four-year frame of reference. It's this traditional student profile you mentioned. We'll come back to that. But Craig, what are some of the other barriers that we've missed here?
Well, I think to sort of dovetail what Tom was talking about, if we really look at how many institutions students are attending before they land on your shore, it's typically 3 to 5. And if they are, being prior military, I can tell you, as a Marine, I would go to, be stationed one place, take some courses, be stationed another place, take some courses. Then by the time I tried to cobble those things together for a degree, it was a headache. So, that obstacle in and of itself is very, very difficult. And then if you have reps, when I was trying to attend these institutions, the reps from different colleges and universities would actually be on the base. So if you're at Camp Lejeune, you've got folks who understand the military, and they're more willing to help you navigate what that space looks like. But if you're transitioning from that to a civilian or to your standard brick and mortar institution, you don't always have that person who understands what that journey might have looked like. So it gets a little bit more challenging. And that's the other thing I think, when we're talking about students who are going through these challenges, a lot of them are military. Yeah. And they're getting out of the branch, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, Coast Guard, Space Force, all of these branches, and then they're trying to make sense of, maybe you had a military occupational specialty while you were in the you go through the ACE guide, you get those credits assigned, you try to take CLEP, you try to do all of these little things to cobble something together, but if the institution is still sticking to that brick and mortar or that traditional student mold, it makes it very difficult. At the University of Arizona, I can tell you we are a very military-friendly institution, and we've gone out of our way to make sure that folks who are in the military making their transitions and folks that are working are getting the assistance that they need. But we still have a ways to go. Going back to the hours of operation, I'm delighted to say that at least our IT is 24/7. There's a couple of other things I'd like to see change, but that's where we are.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you mentioned there's so many little things and big things that can really cause adult learners to stop out. What are some of the biggest reasons that you see working adults not being able to finish their programs, not completing what they may have set out to do, despite like all the good intentions, all the motivation to do so? I don't know who wants to start there.
Finances. I'll
Finances.
just come out and say it.
Okay.
Being able to afford to continue on. You might have gotten some funding in the beginning, and that pipeline might have dried up, and so now you're asking yourself, I'm this far upstream. I only have another 12 credits or 18 credits to go, yet I can't find the funding. And if you're a non-traditional student, it's really hard to get institutional aid, especially if you're taking courses online or what have you. So you're caught in this vicious catch-22. So that's one of the areas that I think can certainly stand for some improvement.
I would agree with Craig. Definitely finances, which the partnership with Gil, we really appreciate that support because you are helping our adult learners. The other thing I would say is that support, right? And so someone who was in school, say 10 years ago, they don't really understand Blackboard, right? Blackboard, they're thinking a blackboard, right? So we, for us, but that's something that is very intimidating, and they could easily get frustrated and get turned off. So, for example, at North Carolina A&T, we have Aggies at the Goal Line, and it's a program that was established in 2017 with the specific intention to support our adult learners, right, who are comebackers, as we like to say. I cannot stress the impact that the lack of support, that lack of having a sense of community, especially our adult learners who are in the online environment. If this is their first time engaging in school in a long time, you don't know the trauma that they experienced the last time that they were in school. They may feel like they're othered in their mind, so they may be battling imposter syndrome or some other just self-doubt or insecurities that have nothing to do with their potential and their aptitude. But this is new for them, right? Or it's a new way of engaging for them. And so I think that lack of support, and it's not, the onus is not always on the institution. Sometimes the student needs to take the initiative, but just creating that space to make sure that whenever they are ready and they reach that level of readiness, that opportunity and that support is available for all of our learners.
Yeah, I think the Aggies at the Goal Line is really interesting as a way to really kind of focus on people who are almost there, right? Giving them credit for prior experience, prior learning. Tom, you all have another kind of pathway program. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Direct Connect?
Yeah, if I could just maybe put a coda on the previous conversation. When we talk about what drives students out, typically these adult learners are not the wealthiest students we have at our institutions. These are people who are kind of pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. They're working full time. And there's a great book called Scarcity. Many of you probably read it. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. These students all kind of suffer from scarcity. There's no margins in their lives, so that if they get sick, if their shift at work gets changed, if they get a flat tire on the way to class, that alone could be enough to completely derail them. Yeah. And if we don't build some slack into the system for them, it's real easy for them to slip through the cracks. So, in answer to your question, we do have this program at UCF called Direct Connect to UCF. It's a partnership between the university and 6 of they were community colleges, now they're called state colleges, in the Central Florida region. And students can choose to get an associate's degree from one of these partners and be guaranteed admission into UCF as a transfer student. And it's been enormously successful. I think we're the largest transfer receiving institution in the country, mostly on the back of this program. And we get between 10 and 11,000 transfer students every year, of which I want to say 7,000, something like that, is through Direct Connect. Our biggest partner is Valencia College in Orlando, and it saves students a ton of money. And it's been a great partnership with the other institutions. We do curricular alignment, and we meet all the time. And it's also really helped to improve our diversity at the university, because those students who are coming in through that pathway tend to be a lot more diverse than those coming through the main, graduating from high school into the freshman cohort pathway.
That's great. And there are, you mentioned a couple different ways that you're sort of lowering the cost of education by having those transfer pathways. Since Craig, you started with finance is the biggest obstacle. That is a big one to solve. What are some of the things that either you all are trying, you're seeing in the marketplace broadly to try to address the issue that, if you're a frontline worker at a retail store, you don't necessarily have the funds, and you certainly can't go out of pocket to finish your education or fund a program. What are some of the solutions that you all are seeing in the market?
Well, let's see. I think, one of these kind of hits home for me personally, and that is when I was on my journey to complete my degree, I wound up getting it through my employer. And that was really, really helpful for me because, when you're trying to figure it out, the transition back to civilian life, you recognize just how important having that degree is, but you're not quite sure how you're going to actually finance it. So having a company that had employee benefits was really helpful. Now, coupled with that is having a nurturing organization that will allow you to actually, exercise that benefit. At the time, there were no, online wasn't really a thing. This was back in the early 90s, and right after Desert Storm. So trying to get things sorted out, it took a lot. So that in and of itself became a great resource for me. And as I look back, the boss who gave me the opportunity to pursue my dream, he and I are still friends, and that's over 30 years. That is the type of thing that I think that more employees need to know, that that's a real benefit, that that it's a pipeline that I think it's underused. I think it's woefully underused, for whatever reason. And even when I came through, no one even knew that was a benefit. And had I not bumped into the HR person in the hallway, I would not have known that was even an option. So.
Yeah, I think at Guild we would certainly agree that employer-sponsored programs are very powerful if they're done the right way with the right policies, the right support behind them. What are other thoughts on how to tackle this core kind of financial question?
So one of the things that we're doing at North Carolina A&T State University, we recently received funding through the Strata Education Network. Because one of the things that we realize is that we really don't know enough about our adult learner population, right? When you look at how we're collecting data at an institutional level, you have to disaggregate the data and dig deep, and we realize, no, we need to dig deeper. We want to know a little bit more. And so hopefully we will be able to understand more exactly what are some of your pain points when it comes to your finances, the support, and that way we can efficiently strategize our initiatives and make adjustments in our policies, our practices, et cetera, so that we can be better equipped to serve and support not just our adult learners, but hopefully the changes that we make support all of our learners at North Carolina A&T, and then provide inspiration and insight for other institutions within North Carolina that are HBCUs as well as non-HBCUs. And so that's what we're really excited about, gathering some data, because I don't think we know enough yet to properly answer and address that question. I don't have a magic blueprint, right? But I do think that we need to continue to investigate and explore so we can fully understand and unpack that complexity of this particular population.
Tom, do you have anything to add to that?
I would underscore the employer, as somebody who got 2 degrees through employers paying for them as an adult, with a family working full time, I completely endorse that. But I would also add, a government program like the Pell Grant has been enormously helpful in allowing us to serve a certain population of students. UCF serves something like, I may not get the number exactly right, but it's at least 50% more Pell students than the entire Ivy League plus combined. Everything that the whole Ivy League plus Stanford and Duke and everybody else, you add them all up, and we serve like 50% more than that just at UCF. And there are public institutions like UCF all across the country that are really serving that population. And I think the Pell program has been a big help.
Yeah, there was a very impassioned, compelling plea at the HBCU panel earlier for the importance of Pell and increasing Pell. Why don't we switch gears a little bit and talk about, okay, so we want more working adult learners to have access to education. What programs do we have to provide? How do we think about creating the programs to both attract and retain those students and create the kind of mobility that many of them are coming into the education system for? How do the institutions think about serving working adult learners from a program perspective? And maybe, Craig, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. When you're saying program, are we talking about academic programs? Or
Academic programs,
academic
sorry.
programs.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a problem. Well, I think you want to make sure that the programs are actually in demand so that folks who are going through the journey, and sometimes those journeys can take years, you want to make sure that at the end of that journey that there are going to be jobs and mobility for them to actually use the credential. I think also working with advisory groups, if your universities have the opportunity to work, I know ours does, and I'm assuming that many of yours do too, to work with business leaders and organizations in your regions to see not just what's in demand today, but what does the next 5 to 7 years look like? Because going back to what Tom and Geleana mentioned earlier, it takes a while for our students to graduate because by their very nature, they're taking it on a part-time basis. So it's not like, they're going to come in and 4 exact years later, they're going to be out there and ready to go. Depending on the amount of credits they have when they enter your institution, it can take 6 years, it can take 8 years. And, we need to be realistic about how we can get them into the workforce as soon as possible so that the credential doesn't expire. Technologically, if you look at the technologies, cybersecurity, computer science, software engineering, and things like that, those tend to be pretty stable in terms of need and demand, particularly as we continue our move forward. But there are also many other pockets, whether it's MBAs, business degrees, or nursing, or these types of things that are still in high demand and still will afford that student a great career once they're done.
Tom, I'm curious, are you all thinking about the academic programming with the working adult learner in mind, or are you kind of plugging them into the existing institutions' academic options and curricula?
I think we began by sort of plugging them in. It was kind of building online courses based upon what we kind of mostly already had online and our online programs. But we're much more intentional now as an institution about looking at high demand professions, especially in our region, whether it's, for us, it would be hospitality, aerospace, modeling and simulation. These are huge in Central Florida. And we've really tried to lean into that. And we've got like new programs that have been developed, things like, it's a new master's degree in themed entertainment. Seems perfect. It's a combination between sort of our arts and our hospitality and our business school. And you go into a restaurant now, it's a themed experience. And so there's all kinds of opportunities. It's identifying those markets, doing the kind of market research that sort of proves that. And I will add that from a policy standpoint, we're getting an awful lot of pressure from the Capitol and our legislature and our Board of Governors to be more workforce aligned. That doesn't hurt us being inspired to do so.
I'm curious, Jelena, so we have seen at Guild and through our employer partners a deeper move into short form workforce aligned programs. How do you see sort of things outside of the traditional degree playing into your plans at NCA&T?
So one thing I definitely want to say is that whatever initiatives, programming that we implement, I do think that, and I'm fortunate that at North Carolina A&T as well as our UNC system level, it starts at your leadership. If your leadership understands this importance of supporting working learners, it goes a long way. And so to have that support of our president of the UNC system, he is very proud, and if you Googled him right now, you would see adult learner pop up at least 5 times. Peter Hans, he is so much an advocate for adult learners throughout the entire UNC system. And then for our chancellor and our provost, Chancellor Martin, he gets it. And there are a lot of institutions, unfortunately, that don't have that leadership support and that buy-in. So I want to say that any program that we put in place, it starts at that top. But I am very interested in the micro-credentials. However, I have a little bit of caution, and this is not Jelena Alston representing North Carolina A&T. This is just Jelena's thoughts, right? I am concerned that the go-to is to provide these adult learners with these short credentials, and I don't want for them to feel like that's it, right? That you get this credential, you go out and work. I want them to know that no, maybe I just have a more humanistic perspective, but at least I know at North Carolina A&T, no, we don't want you to just stop at that short credential. We want you to see yourself and actualize yourself as earning your bachelor's, actualize yourself as earning your master's, earning your doctorate, PhD or EDD, right? And so I'm very hopeful, and I think that those stackable credentials, micro credentials, feeder or what we consider power pathways, I think they're great, but I just don't want for us to focus on that short stop, right? I want for us to say, hey, yes, there's an opportunity, but I want you to go a little further. I want you to go as far as you can, and it's up to us at the institution to create those support systems to help them get wherever they want to, wherever they're trying to go.
It's a great point, and also what you said about having leadership that is aligned to really properly supporting this audience, I think really resonates. What about another stakeholder that is equally important, which is faculty? Okay, so most universities, most institutions have some sort of dual governance model. How do you get the faculty on board with everything that it might take to engage with working adult learners in the classroom and oftentimes now online? Tom, do you want to speak to that?
Sure, and I would say we don't necessarily, I don't think we completed that journey. We're on that path now. My experience in working with faculty is that they care deeply about their students' success, all of their students, regardless of they're a first time in college, 18-year-old freshman, or if they're a 35-year-old coming back to college, never been to college before kind of freshman. And they want them to succeed. So that helps a lot, right? When the faculty are motivated and really care and are invested in their students' success, specifically about some of the things that we might do. And I can speak probably more detailed to the kind of training we provide for online instruction, but if you drew a Venn diagram, there'd be a big overlap between the online students and the adult students. And so there are certain things that we teach faculty about serving that particular population, things like, if you're going to hold virtual office hours, have multiple times because you know that your students can't make it all at like 10 o'clock on a Wednesday morning because they're working. Do one in the evening on a Thursday or something like that. Have options for these students who maybe don't have that slack in their lives, who have scarcity.
Craig, I know I've heard you talk about faculty having to think differently about working adult learners and the way they engage with them. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, boy, this is always a loaded question, right? But at the end of the day, going back to what was mentioned earlier, the faculty do care immensely about their student success. I think with the institution, you know, the faculty kind of move with it as a block when it comes to availability of services and things like that. But before I go further with that, I want to kind of go back to the credentials, the stackable credentials. Because we're on a, you know, we have several locations in Arizona, and some of them are along the border, right? So some of the students who we wind up getting don't really have the opportunity to think that, to think in 4-year blocks, and then get to the master's, and then get to the doctorate. So having the stackables is really helpful for them because it allows them to have some immediate gain. Sometimes that's what it takes, that you need to have an immediate gain to stay with it. And you know, I'm thinking about our spaces in Douglas and Nogales, which is right real close to the border. And we just wanted to make sure that students have multiple pathways in. And then, of course, you know, you want to encourage them to go as far as they want to. But I think it was Ginny Rometty, the former CEO of IBM, who talked about not the blue collar, but the new collar jobs. And these new collar jobs don't require us to sit and think that you have to go through 4 years. It does allow students to get a credential earlier in their academic life cycle, so that they can keep the lights on, keep food in the house. You know, we're a land grant institution in Arizona, and one of our missions is access, and providing access to as many students as possible. And to do that, we look at stackable credentials that can ultimately lead to a degree. But we also recognize that sometimes students just can't continue for whatever reason, and we want them to walk away with a credential that will allow for some semblance of social mobility. So, so that was that side.
So yeah, create value in whatever kind of program or course or degree that they're taking, but also have a pathway to something beyond that. If you had to rate on a scale of 1 to 10, stackability is like something a lot of people are talking about now. It's a vision. If 10 is everything is perfectly stackable, Lego-like, fluid, where are we right now in terms of stackability? Jelena, where do you think we are?
Okay, so I'm gonna come back to that, but as the only faculty member on the panel, I have to address the previous question.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect. Let's.
So, and actually, I'm an associate professor of adult education, so I do teach people how to teach and engage adults, right? But the one thing I can say is that, at least at North Carolina A&T, we have been very good about faculty development. I know that there's a question, you know, there's specialized training. For example, we were recently funded for received some funding, and what we plan to do with the funding is to have 25 of our faculty and administrators become CALE certified when it comes to credit for prior learning. So it starts at that level, right? And so we have this train-the-trainer model where we're going to take those 25 faculty leaders and administrators, and then they're going to go out and conduct and engage in faculty development programs and workshops within their units, right? If you're a faculty out there, engage your faculty senate, get buy-in from your faculty senate, right? I do believe in shared governance, and once you have those conversations and say, hey, you all, this is important, right? Or you just do a survey, how many adult learners do you have? And ask them, are they comfortable, right, with engaging adult learners?
Yep.
Because you don't know what you don't know, first and foremost. And just because you are a great teacher and you've taught statistics or aerodynamics for so many years, you may not be as competent or comfortable engaging adult learners, right?
Yeah.
So be honest and open about your areas of opportunity and growth, right? So I
Thank you for coming back to that.
come back to that, Jeff. I'm sorry. And then to your question about the stackables, I really don't know. I think that there are some institutions that are doing really, really good with it, but And part of it is because of what we're experiencing with the pandemic.
Yeah.
So to me, when the stackable credentials and a lot of that started to propel and catch momentum, the pandemic hit. And so I'm waiting to see what are the outgrowths or the impacts of that. And I really don't know if we've been able to assess it appropriately as of right now, or at least from my purview.
Tom, where do you think we are?
Yeah, I would agree. I think at the macro level, we're pretty good. You know, you get an associate's degree, that stacks into a bachelor's degree. You get a graduate certificate, that can stack into a master's degree, and master's degrees, some of them can stack into a doctoral degree. But beyond that, there's very little consistency across the system, across the entire higher ed ecosystem. I agree that I think some institutions are doing a good job within the institution of creating stackable credentials, but having those be portable is a real challenge. And I'll say it's something that we're having a hard time doing even within our institution. It's a fight I'm having right now, and we're working on it.
Craig, do you have a grade, a 1 to 10 grade where we are on stackability?
If I had to give it a number, I'd say we're probably between a 3 and a 4. You know, we've got a lot of, I mean, as an industry, as a higher education industry, you know, there are so many other facets to it. And if you look at some of the folks, you know, whether it's Google, whether it's any one of the actual organizations that would receive these folks, some of them are doing it really well, and they're doing it on multiple platforms, you know, whether it's Coursera, edX, and things of that nature. But I think that, you know, within the confines of a university or a college, we struggle because if you really wanted to do, all right, so here's the deal. If you really wanted to do it in a way that could be on the same plane as what's happening in industry, you really have to utilize your non-credit component of your institution because the price points are lower, you're much more reflective of workforce needs, and you can move really, really quick. That proof of concept could be used to move that program into the other side of your university. You'd have to use some really, from a policy standpoint, you'd have to look at your existing policies and figure out, well, how could I take those competencies that were learned on the non-credit side and apply it to a credit-based certificate or a credit-based degree? And one of the mechanisms that might be useful is a credit for prior learning, a PLA assessment.
Yep.
And so, in essence, you're creating your own prior learning because you'd have gone through it, you'd have created it on your non-credit. You could, you know, make it at a price point that's palatable to many more students. And then those students, you know, those who were willing to go further, as Jelena just pointed out, going to your bachelor's or master's, then those could move over, you know, and typically it's, the caveat is that typically you're only going to be able to move 3 to 6 credits from the non-credit side to the credit side, but at least it gives you an opportunity to use a low stakes, particularly if you've been out of university for a while, a low stakes way of not messing up your transcript. So if you've had, you know, non-credit doesn't affect your credit transcript. So you come through the non-credit side, you try it out as a proof of concept. If it works, then you can move it over to the credit side through those policies such as a prior learning assessment.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So credit for prior learning is both an unlock for stackability, but it's also a way to reduce the cost for the learner or whoever is financing the education. All right, why don't we move to outcomes? Okay. How, and so we're bringing more working adult learners into the system. We're hopefully doing a better and better job of serving up the right programming to them. But then how do we know if we're actually achieving outcomes? And most of the way we look at outcomes data right now is, Tom, I think you made the point, really focused on the traditional kind of 4-year student. So even things like on-time completion rates and persistence rates for working adults who are coming in and out of the system, who are coming in and out of programs, don't feel like they're the right measures. Are we measuring the right things to evaluate outcomes for working adult learners? Tom, what do you think?
I might argue that things like retention and persistence are more valuable than like four-year graduation rate.
Four-year rate, yeah.
There has to be some graduation at some point, right? We just have to figure out what that time horizon is that we all kind of would agree to, especially for part-time working adult students. But as long as students are making satisfactory academic progress towards that ultimate graduation goal, persistence and retention, I think, are valuable measures to continually track, as is their performance within courses. Are they getting the grades necessary in order to continue that progression? Are they getting what they need to stay in their major? And I am a kind of a believer in a certain amount of momentum that needs to be built up. If you're coming in and out, you're at risk of not coming back. So even if it's just taking that one course next semester, just keep forward momentum, keep going, and don't lose your place. It becomes too easy to have that spot in your life for school filled up with other things that are also important. It's one reason why we put so much emphasis on our success coaches. All of our online students get a success coach. And we find that the persistence and the retention for fully online students with success coaches is 16 points higher than fully online students without success coaches. And part of their goal is to just keep the students moving forward, even if it's one course at a time.
Jelena, what do you think? What are the metrics that we should be thinking about?
So I think we have to continue to engage employers, right? Because I think that's an important metric. Like, what are they doing post-graduation, post-completion? And then I am also a fan of indirect and qualitative data. Yep, I said it, right? Because their stories matter, right? Some of the data that we get about the experiences of working learners, their experiences when they are engaging with their employers, we can't get that through a survey. It doesn't come through. I think that there's a strength for that approach to data collection, but just making sure that you have responsible relationships with your corporate partners, understanding, hey, this is what you're experiencing. Are they demonstrating a certain type of skill? Are they demonstrating a certain type of competency? If so, yes. If not, what can we do? How can we partner to make sure that we're preparing and making those necessary adjustments, right? So I think that the institutions need to continue to engage the employer, because that, to me, is where we're really going to have, to me, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? Yeah. If the goal is to support working learners, we all want to, of course, support them as lifelong learners, but there is an economic development initiative and component with it in stimulating the workforce. So if it is that important, then let's have conversations with the employers so that we can be better informed.
Yeah, so I love that. You're describing sort of social mobility metrics, economic mobility metrics. Craig, do you have thoughts on that? Like if we could collect any data to demonstrate progress, what would we want to be looking at?
Well, aside from what my esteemed colleagues have already brought up, I'd probably look at salary and promotion. What was the output, after all of the time spent and time investment, family investment, and everything else to get that student through? Did the salaries actually increase? Did they receive a promotion? I think that completes the picture, between the graduations and everything else and the persistence. At the end, when I got this degree, how did my life actually change? And, creating that full composite, I think, would be helpful.
Yeah. I'd like to underscore Jelena's social mobility context, though, because that is so important. I think it's so often overlooked. There's a kind of a perfunctory nod toward it in the U.S. News and World Report rankings, but I think it's so much more important than the credit it's been given. Yeah. Social mobility is key, especially for those of us who are in a public institution. It's really part of the reason why we exist.
Tom, I've heard you refer to soul metrics. What are soul metrics?
Yeah, soul metrics is a term our provost has used to kind of describe those things like our ability to serve transfer students, our ability to serve non-traditional students, that are not necessarily metrics that the U.S. News and World Report rankings might measure. And in many cases, the soul metrics of the institution, like serving 10,000 transfer students a year, are in direct tension with the U.S. News and World Report rankings, which are asking us to be more selective. And how do we balance that when we've got a board that's pushing us to move up the ranks, yet the whole university community is very much committed to this access mission. And trying to navigate that is sometimes a challenge. But when he refers to soul metrics, that's what we all think of, and it definitely keeps it front of mind.
I love that. I love that term. All right, so let's think about what's next. So if there are either other institutions, education providers, or employers in the audience, and they want to do something in the next year to better serve working adults, what are one or two things that you would put on that list? Jelena?
Ooh, if I had a magic wand, I would say, and it really is an outgrowth of just our theme up here today. Have opportunities for financial support that are not restricted to you being a full-time student, that are not restricted to a minimum of how many credit hours you have to take, that are not restricted to a particular degree program, right? Open that up a little bit so that your working adult learners can have opportunities unlike they could before when it comes to financial support, scholarships, right? I do believe in academic and performance-based scholarships, but even our students who are adult learners, they may not have access to that because they're not on the same rotation or schedule, right, as some of your other students. So that would be the first thing, to create opportunities for funding and support that do not have those restrictions.
Great. Craig?
I would probably lean toward making them feel like they belong. Make these students feel like they belong at your institution. That is one of the things that we're putting on the forefront. We're calling it the year of belongingness. And, we want to make sure that, first of all, I hate the word non-traditional, okay? Anything non always sounds so negative. And so we struggle with that word. We struggle with that word, and we came up, of course, you hear post-traditional, but then what happens if a student is 19? Are they now post when they're still within the traditional age group? So, so then we came up with another name and said, well, what do we call them? New students. Well, what does new mean? Well, numerous educational ways to enter your institution, So that's kind of our working title. But you spend so much time explaining new, N-E-W. But I think it still goes back to belongingness and recognizing that in every one of those students is really a reflection of you. As I mentioned earlier, my journey was a very sordid journey, trying to get my first degree. And had it not been for people who cared, and the representatives of the universities that I wound up attending, because they were, I guess, key to understanding what the military life was like, that made my journey easier to understand. And I promised myself that if I ever got into a position where I could pay that forward, I would absolutely do that and be honored to do so. So that's where it begins, making that student feel like they're not an appendage, and that goes with policy. Going back to what Jelena mentioned earlier, if all your crucial services are 8 to 5, what are you telling that student?
Yeah.
You're telling that student they don't belong there. No matter how much lip service you give everything else, if every single thing that they need happens when they can't get to it, then they don't belong there. And we got to flip that. We have to make them feel like they belong.
That's great. Tom, bring us home.
Yeah, and I won't repeat what Craig and Jelena have said, because I think there's been a lot of really great suggestions, including very practical things. But I think at the heart of it all is being very intentional about stating your desire to serve these particular students. Put them in the strategic plan. Call them out by name in your strategic plan. If you look at some of the demographic data that are predicted, there will be a drop in high school graduates over the next 5 to 10 years. Who are the students we are going to serve? We're going to have to replace those students somehow if we intend to keep the same tuition revenue at our institutions. And it'll be these, sorry, Craig, non-traditional students. I don't know what else to call it.
Adult learners.
Adult learners,
Adult
thank
learners.
you.
Adult learners,
So
yeah.
it'll be this population of students that we're going to have to serve. And now is the time to figure out how to do it really well when we're going to have a whole bunch of them in another 5 or 10 years.
That's great. I think, sorry, we got very involved in this conversation. We have time for probably a couple of questions if people have questions. I can dimly see that there are some coming through the app. Yeah.
So I'm the principal of an adult high school, so there's a lot of transferability between the challenges that I'm seeing and the challenges that you are giving voice to. So I'm wondering, like, in general, what are your adult learner retention rates? I'm wondering if mine mirror that or if we're way off. And what programs outside of financial support are you building or already have that help to assist with the barriers that that specific, adult learner is bringing in with them?
Who wants to take adult learner retention?
I'll just jump in because I'm such a fan of adult high schools, right?
Yeah.
So, and if you're out there, partner and build relationships with your adult high schools, right? They need our support and we need their support, and it's just a great partnership. At North Carolina A&T, over the past 5 years, we've actually seen a decline in our adult learner population. And again, there's so many different factors with the pandemic. But I can't, highlight Aggies at the goal line enough. And Aggies at the goal line, say if you started at North Carolina A&T and you decide later on in life that you want to come back, as long as you earned at least 90 credits and you maintained a 2.0, you can come back and there's a person in the office that supports you and provides a wraparound service. Now, one thing that we do recognize in North Carolina A&T is that not all of our adult learners qualify because we have transfer students, we have other students who this is just their first time attending college and they're beyond the age of 23. And so we're starting to look to see how can we take what we started with Aggies at the goal line and spread it out across campus, right? And so I'm really excited about that. We, like I mentioned, we have funding to support a couple of different initiatives. So hopefully in the next few years, we'll see that retention rate change when it comes to our adult learner population, as well as see it increase in our enrollment when it comes to adult learners.
Anybody else have a baseline retention rate that you're tracking and want to share?
I don't I just know the online population, but that includes more than this, this adult learner population.
Right, yeah.
You were talking earlier about, and this is open to anybody on the panel, obviously, about measuring success based on tracking the migration from salary at the beginning part of the journey to what it might become post-journey, and whether there's other incremental promotions employment-wise. How would you go about sort of incentivizing the student, since they've sort of left your purview at that point, they've gone out into the world? How would you try to capture that information, or how are you capturing it now?
So actually, I think Craig made that comment.
Alumni surveys will catch that. Exit surveys, you have a career education portion of your institution, they can capture that information. Now, of course, it's self-reported. So you kind of have to go on that, but a lot of the things that we depend on are self-reported, and people tend to give the numbers that are pretty much in the ballpark of where they actually are. So is it a perfect instrument? Probably not, but it does provide at least a baseline.
I would also say employers probably have to be part of that solution to at least providing some level of aggregate data. And I think we're getting cut off now. So thank you.